Welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning in. This is the account with the news summary for day 400 of the war in Ukraine. Today I have 3 extra segments. The first is a short update on Russia's latest drone and missile attack, which started during the recording of the report. The second one is about President Zelensky's speech to the Austrian National Council, and the last contains updates on the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra situation. All other updates are grouped into the usual: situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, including updates on the arrest of a Wall Street Journal journalist, and the international developments, containing updates on additional aid to Ukraine and updates on China's stance to the war. Before we start though, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. Heavy fighting is reported as Russian assaults inside Bakhmut continue and are focused on the northern part and the south of the central district. Russian channel Rybar reported today that the fighting for the industrial zone of the Azov steelworks continues, despite Russian claims yesterday that it was captured. However, we can assume that a good part of the Azov steelworks is under Russian control. The situation outside Bakhmut is largely stable for now. According to General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, about 6,000 mercenaries of the Wagner PMC and about 20 to 30,000 conscripts are currently fighting for the city of Bakhmut. He stated that Russian forces are suffering an enormous amount of casualties and called it a slaughterfest for the Russians. Avdiivka. Heavy fighting is reported around Avdiivka. Kamyanka seems to be heavily contested. Ukrainian sources claim that Ukrainian soldiers do not allow Russian units to gain a foothold in Kamyanka. However, the settlement is no longer controlled by Ukraine. And to start the news segment, the updates on the latest Russian drone and missile attack. During the recording, an air raid warning was issued for Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Poltava, and Kharkiv oblasts. Russia reportedly launched 12 Shahed drones from the north and fired S-300 missiles at the city of Kharkiv. At least 6 explosions have been reported from Kharkiv so far. A look at President Zelensky's speech to the National Council of Austria. The President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, addressed the National Council of Austria today. In his speech, he explained in detail how Russian soldiers left thousands of explosives and grenades hidden in the buildings, gardens, parks and yards of ordinary residents, which take the lives of Ukrainians in the liberated territories almost every day. Zelensky spoke about the cases when the invaders deliberately left explosive devices in musical instruments, household appliances and various things before leaving Ukrainian settlements, and emphasized the importance of helping Ukraine in demining territories. He went on to explain that a total area of 174,000 square kilometers, which is twice the area of Austria, is contaminated by Russian landmines. He finished his speech explaining that while Austria is a military neutral state, it is impossible to hold a morally neutral stance against evil. Russian state media, meanwhile, celebrated the walkout by the Austrian far-right Freedom Party, which is currently the opposition. Moving on to the latest updates on the Kyiv Perchesk Lavra situation. The abbot of the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra, Metropolitan Pavlo, has warned Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that God will not forgive the transgression for evicting the clergy of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. The abbot and his supporters also threatened journalists with violence, with the abbot stating, "I'm going to take the stick and crush all your cameras." Supporters began telling the journalists not to provoke them, while one of the clergy pounced on one of the journalists and tore his charging wire. The Union of Journalists of Ukraine, meanwhile, reported mass violations of journalists' rights near the Kyiv Perchesk Lavra. Supporters of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate are covering cameras, swearing at them, threatening to beat reporters with sticks, and pushing journalists. Priests, meanwhile, continue to hold services despite the fact that the lease agreement has been terminated. The church service was said to last until 10 a.m. when a commission from the Ministry of Culture was supposed to arrive at the premises. However, supporters have prevented the commission from entering and taking inventory of the property of the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra reserve. After managing to get through the supporters, the commission could not start its work as they were unable to get into the first building because it was closed. The Ministry of Culture of Ukraine has now turned to the police and filed a lawsuit against the obstruction. Police stopped a car that was removing an icon from the premises. Even though the Ministry of Culture gave permission for the transport, the police turned back the car. The court in Kyiv refused to consider the lawsuit filed by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate against the Kyiv Perchesk Lavra Natural Reserve Administration, in which clerics demanded that the termination of the deal on a free lease of the Lavra premises be revoked. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. According to Hanna Malya, the Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, during some days of the war, Russia is suffering up to 10 times the casualties Ukraine is suffering. The loss ratio increased almost 2 times in favor for Ukraine compared to during the 2014 to 2015 hostilities. The Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmitry Kuleba, has criticized the fact that Russia will assume the rotating presidency of the UN Security Council on April 1st. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. The International Atomic Energy Agency Director General, Rafael Grossi, said that there had been a significant increase in the number of troops in the area of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and it could no longer be protected. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. The Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation has detained Ivan Gershkovich, a Wall Street Journal reporter, in Yekaterinburg, and a criminal case has been opened against him for espionage. The spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, claimed that the activities of the Wall Street Journal employee had nothing to do with journalism. She stressed that this is not the first time that the status of foreign correspondent is used by foreigners in the Russian Federation to cover up activities that are not related to journalism. The Wall Street Journal published an article by Ivan Gershkovich on March 28th, discussing how Russia's economy is beginning to gradually collapse due to a long war in Ukraine and sanctions introduced against the country. According to the article, Russia's government revenue is being squeezed and its economy has shifted to a lower growth trajectory, likely for the long term. Russia's biggest export, gas and oil, have lost major customers. Government finances are strained. The ruble is down over 20% since November against the dollar. In addition, the labor force has shrunk as young people are sent to the front or flee the country over fears of being drafted. Uncertainty has curbed business investment. Belaruski Hayun has warned that Russia most likely has delivered new S-300, S-400 anti-aircraft missile systems to Belarus. As a reminder, Russia has increasingly used anti-aircraft missiles to attack ground targets in Ukraine. The State Duma of the Russian Federation has announced that new conscripts called up in April will not be serving in the new territories which Russia annexed last year. John Kirby, coordinator for strategic communications at the National Security Council in the White House, said that the Russian Federation is seeking to obtain munitions from North Korea, possibly offering food in return. Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree on the spring draft which will traditionally begin on April 1st and last until July 15th. The Russian army plans to draft 147,000 people. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The press service of the Ministry of Community, Territories and Infrastructure Development of Ukraine reported that Ukraine and Japan have agreed on an aid package of $400 million, which will be directed to the restoration of Ukraine's critical infrastructure. The White House has not seen any evidence that Ukraine is improperly managing the military aid provided by the United States. U.S. National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications John Kirby stated in a press briefing, "We haven't seen any evidence that there's been an egregious misconduct when it comes to managing the security assistance that's gone to Ukraine." Ukraine has received another $1.25 billion from the US, which will mainly be used for social payments. According to the Chinese Defense Ministry, the Chinese army is ready to strengthen cooperation with the Russian armed forces in accordance with the agreements between the two leaders. The principal deputy spokesperson for the US Department of State, Vedant Patel, said during a briefing that the US government is against the Chinese peace proposal to end the Russian-Ukrainian war, which would enable Russia to prepare a new attack on Ukraine. Before her trip to China, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, tied the future relations between the European Union and China to how Beijing will interact with Russia. Moldovan President Maia Sandu has stated that Russia wants to use her country against Ukraine like the Kremlin uses Belarus. According to her, the Moldovan authorities have evidence that Russia is trying to undermine and overthrow the government. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. Russian media reporting suggests that the authorities are preparing to start a major military recruitment campaign with the aim of signing up additional 400,000 troops. Russia is presenting the campaign as a drive for volunteer, professional personnel rather than a new mandatory mobilization. There is a realistic possibility that in practice this distinction will be blurred and that regional authorities will try to meet their allocated recruitment targets by coercing men to join up. Russian authorities have likely selected a supposedly volunteer model to meet their personnel shortfall in order to minimize domestic dissent. It is highly unlikely that the campaign will attract 400,000 genuine volunteers. However, rebuilding Russia's combat power in Ukraine will require more than just personnel. Russia needs more munitions and military equipment supplies than it currently has available. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The assessment today only discusses rather minor topics which do not evaluate the war in Ukraine. Therefore, I will just be reading the topic headlines instead of giving a summary. Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow on March 29th to review strategic and long-term cooperation agreements that will likely intensify Russia and Iran's bilateral security relationship. Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin seized on the recent story of the sentencing of a Tula Oblast father for his 12-year-old daughter's anti-war drawing to promote the Wagner Group's reputation and ameliorate his own personal image. Chechen Republic head Ramzan Kadyrov's demonstrative response to an attack on a police station in Chechnya suggests that he may be concerned about the stability of his authoritarian rule. Russian authorities arrested Russian National Guard, Rosgvardia, Naval Department head Colonel Sergei Volkov for corruption-related charges. Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov stated on March 27th that Ukrainian forces may be planning to launch a counteroffensive in April or May, depending on weather conditions. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy is concentrating its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka directions. The settlements of Bilohorivka, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Marinka remain at the epicenter of hostilities. 47 enemy attacks in the specified directions were repelled. In the Kupiansk and Liman directions, during the day, the enemy conducted unsuccessful offensive actions in the area of Stelmachivka, Kusmine, and Berestovo. There are two settlements with the name Berestovo, and both would be possible targets. I'm sorry, but I do not know which one is meant here. In the direction of Bakhmut, the enemy continues its assault on the city of Bakhmut. However, our defenders courageously hold the city, repel numerous enemy attacks. During the day, the occupiers conducted unsuccessful offensive actions in the Orikhovo-Vasilivka region of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Avdiivka and Marinka directions, the enemy carried out offensive actions in the districts of Novobakhmutivka, Novokalinove, Stepove, Avdiivka, Siverne, Vodiane, Krasnohorivka, and Marinka of the Donetsk Oblast without success. And that concludes another report. Should you be interested in any of the articles and want to read up on the details, you can find links to them in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. I hope you will join me again tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.